That's so weird talking to a camera. Alright, so for today's video, I made a list of all my regrets from the past year and everything I've learned from them, so let's begin. I just thought this was a good idea since it could be something I could do every single year. So, yeah. The first thing I wrote down was I regret not taking accountability because it's the first step towards growth. I feel like this past year, I didn't really make a system to keep myself accountable to make sure that I do the things that I need to do or say that I will do. So, for example, I wanted to start a business, and unfortunately, I did not really stay on track. I started pretty good in the beginning of the year because when I was brainstorming ideas for what I wanted to say as a regret, I saw this picture like during the beginning of last year. I just had a bunch of like screenshots and videos of like self growth and business stuff. And unfortunately, it didn't really lead to the outcome that I was hoping for. So, yeah, like I said, accountability is the first step towards growth. Since without taking accountability for your actions and making sure that you're on track, you're not going to grow as a person and you're not going to reach the goals that you want to achieve. Something that ties into that, I wrote down readiness is built in motion, not in waiting. What that basically means is, for at least for my case, action beats over preparation. Last year, I tried my best to try and over prepare for a bunch of things. So, for example, for my business idea, I kept doing all these research. I was watching all these YouTube videos and reading and all that. But unfortunately, I didn't really take the major steps that I needed to take to build that business. So, all that over preparation doesn't mean anything if you don't take action. This is a big one. So the past year, unfortunately, I failed one of my classes for my degree. It was a class in linear systems and signals. Although I think I did try, there were definitely things that I should have done better. This ties into my regret that I feel like I'm a little too harsh on myself when I fail. So, with me saying that, failure is basically not the be-all, end-all of everything. It's basically feedback for your future. Like I said, I failed this class, and unfortunately, I did not do the things that I need to do to make sure I passed the class fully. I did study, I did do the homeworks, I did all that, but I did not do it to the degree that I should have. From that mistake, I learned. The next following semester, I retook the class with the same professor. Mind you, the class is already supposed to be hard. The professor also did not make it that easy for everyone. He's, people call him the gatekeeper of our degree because he is notorious for being a hard professor. But I think he's fair. I think he passes the people that deserves to pass, and he fails the people that deserves to fail. And unfortunately, I feel like I was the latter. But fast forward, a semester later, I retook the class. I studied way more than I did the semester previously. I took the test more seriously. I did all the homeworks, and I got almost perfect scores on every single one of them. I did everything I needed to do from learning from my mistake from the first semester, and I ended up passing the class this past semester with a better grade than what I probably would have got if I passed it the first semester. But also I did better than most of the people that ended up passing the class the first time. But yeah, so failure is not the be-all and end-all. It's feedback. My next regret is to spend time, how do I phrase this? I regret not spending my time more deliberately. This past year, I feel like my time was wasted on a lot of things that I shouldn't have wasted it on. And this kind of ties into the idea that I wanted to say. I wrote down every yes quietly cost something else. What I meant by that is basically the idea of give and take. I only have a specific amount of time, and I ended up trading it for something instead of doing something else that I needed. So an example of this could be, I would say that I have to study for this test or something or do my homework, but unfortunately I end up spending way too much time scrolling on TikTok, or I spent too much time hanging out with a friend. Although it is good to be able to do the things that you want to do, I think there is a way that you have to figure out for yourself so that you can balance all those things together. And I think that's something I struggled this past year is I never really found that balance. So yeah, I I wish and I learned that I should spend my time more deliberately and figure out a way to make sure that happens. And that ties into my next point for that is what I learned from the mistake of not spending my time more deliberately is creating a routine is a lot more useful than you think it would be. What I mean by that is by making sure that you implement a system for yourself and how you want to do things, you'll be able to keep track and make sure that you're doing the things that you need to do while also keeping yourself, kind of tying back to my first point, it keeps you accountable so that you end up actually doing the things that you say you're going to do. This kind of ties into what I was trying to talk about with my ECE class. During exam season, I'd make a system so that I'd be able to study more. Last semester, I'd only study like the night before. This semester, I'm sure I could have done a lot better, but I would study more than just the night before. I'd study a couple days. And I guess my final point for that is willpower is not as reliable as you think it would be, but a system is. If you set a system for yourself to make sure that you're able to do the actions and the things you need to do in order to achieve your goals, it's going to beat your willpower to try and do it. Just saying that, you know, your discipline is going to beat that because it's not. Discipline is important, but a system is arguably more important. Another regret of mine this past year is not being as consistent as I would want. So my point for that is consistency always beats intensity. There's a big, saying in the gym when people work out that intensity is so much more important than volume. The thing with that is intensity is just as important as consistency because if you're not consistent with going to the gym, then all that intensity doesn't matter. And I think that's kind of what happened to me last year was I would go really hard in the gym. I'd go for like a good month staying with my system, staying with my routine that I set for myself. I'd eat good. I'd go to the gyms. I do like a PPL upper lower split. So basically 5 times a week I'm going to the gym and I'm getting adequate rest. And I did that for a good month. But after the month, it just kind of went downhill. I think something I personally needed to work on is figuring out a way to make sure that if I were sick, I had a plan on what I was going to do if I was sick. Or the other thing would be if I missed a day, how am I going to, make up for that? Because, like I said, I went really intense last year. And the second I missed a day, it broke my flow. And next thing you know, I wasn't going to the gym for weeks on end. So I wish I was more consistent. And something I learned about that is it's much more important than intensity. My next regret is not being more punctual than I should. There's a saying that goes, early is good, on time is bad, and late is worse. And I think that applies to a lot of things in my life this past year, and it's something that I want to implement in this future year to make sure that I am more punctual. This kind of ties into like one of the things that I started last year, which was my investing. I started investing back in April, and it was very basic stuff, just doing like low index funds and or low cost index funds, I should say, like stuff that invest in the S&P or the Nasdaq. I started that in April. I kept doing it during the year, and I think I did pretty well. I think I had like 20% returns. And there's a saying in the like investment world where they say the best time to invest was yesterday, and the second best time is today. The whole point I'm trying to make is starting earlier is much more important than people think. So, like I said, be early, don't be on time, don't be late. Another regret I have is I regret waiting till the last minute to do a lot of things. An example of this could be something as basic as homework. So I'd wait like the night before it's due because that puts way too much stress on me. I have pretty good grades, but if I just put in more work earlier, I feel like I'd do a lot better. The other example of that would be things towards like my career is last year I feel like I waited too long to try and apply for things, for example, like internships and co-ops. And, unfortunately, I'm getting punished for it. So I think that's one thing I want to do better on this year, is to make sure that I don't wait till the last minute. So yeah, this next two, I'm going to tie into one. And I wrote down, I regret not looking out for those who I care about, and I regret not really appreciating the things that people do for me and being more open about it. I'm tying that in together because I think it's the same idea, but just framed in a different way. For that first part, when I say I regret not looking out for those who I care about, I feel like there's things that I could do more to make sure that I'm checking in on the people who are important in my life. Because sooner or later, I'm going to regret not doing that. And I think it's important to make sure that I start taking the steps to doing that, so that I don't regret not looking out for those who I care about when it's too late. And that ties into my second point, where I said I regret not really appreciating the things that people do for me and being open about it, because I've come to learn that people want to know that they are appreciated. I know that sounds very basic, but it's the truth. And unfortunately, I am someone who tends to keep those thoughts to myself, where, like, if I'm thankful for something, I give a basic thank you and that's it. I don't really go in depth and really tell the person that I care about that I am thankful for what they do for me, or what they did for us, or whatever the case may be. And one thing I regret is, unfortunately, that takes a toll on my personal relationships with people, is I don't fully appreciate the things that they do for me, because I don't realize, or I don't really think of it as a sacrifice for me. And I think that's something that I want to improve on this upcoming year, is I want to be able to make sure that people know that I appreciate the things they do. I want them to know that I'm not ungrateful and that I do think about them. My last regret that I'm going to talk about today, or mention today, I'm sure there's a lot more, but these were just the ones that I could think of, and just, off the top of my head. I regret not sticking with what I say. I tell myself and I tell others that I would end up doing something, and turns out I don't. So an example that I always bring up is I'd say that I would go to the gym. Next thing you know, I'm scrolling through TikTok or Instagram or playing my video game or whatever, and I don't end up going. The other thing would be, like, I get in an argument with someone. I tell them that I'm going to do better, or I won't do this ever again. And unfortunately, I don't stick with that. I end up doing it again. I end up hurting their feelings. And although I know for a fact that I'm trying, I feel like there's many times where I could try more, where I can do better. And so for this upcoming year, I've learned that your actions are, this is very cliche, but your actions are more important than your words. If you say you're going to do something, just do it. Don't push it off. Don't act like it's not that important. But I want to be able to make sure that if I say I'm going to do something, it actually gets done. Because if I don't, I feel like it's disrespectful to the person I'm telling that to, but also it's disrespectful to me. And I want to make sure that I keep myself in the right mindset, where I have respect for myself to do the things that I say I'm going to do. And I guess, my final words for that is, I wrote down, most lessons arrive late, so you better use them early. All these regrets that I had and all the lessons I've learned from these regrets, unfortunately, they come in after the fact. I make the mistake and then I learn the lesson. And I guess the last thing I want to say is, make sure you use those lessons well and you apply them to your life early, so that you can stop yourself from making the same mistakes again. That's all I had to say. Peace.